Something strange has been going on around here. Whenever I am working on a project, my tools keep disappearing. Finished projects are starting to miss little pieces of furniture, and I'm hoping this doesn't have anything to do with that fairy door I made a couple weeks ago, but I'm thinking it might. So for those of you who don't know or are new here, way back on my channel, I made a little fairy house in a teapot, and catastrophe struck and that fairy house broke. But now I'm starting to think that maybe that house wasn't so empty. So I'm gonna build a new fairy house, and hopefully all of the missing items will be returned. So if there's one thing I know about fairies, it's that they love to live inside of something that looks like something else. Either mushrooms, or a tree stump, or a teapot that's broken in half. And there's this Japanese artist whose name is Mozu, of Mozu Studios, and he has done little tiny houses inside of light switches and that are inside of power outlets, and I always thought that was super cute, but I live in an apartment and there's not really anywhere for me to do that, so I decided to build a fake light switch that's renter friendly, sticks out from the wall, and most importantly, it's gonna house my fairy house so that hopefully my stuff doesn't keep going missing. Okay, let's do that. Okay, so for the first part of building the box that this home is gonna live inside of, I'm making some wood floors. So my idea for this box is that it's gonna need to be a bedroom so that she'll have a place to sleep, but also I've been finding notes around that are like, hey, really need a place to stay, gonna stay here for a while, and then like a haiku under it. So I think that this fairy probably followed me because I like to read, she probably likes to read, probably likes to write. I think she's probably into poetry. So I'm gonna make her a nice little bedroom with a reading/writing area, and yeah, that's the general idea for this build. So I'm starting with the wood floors. To make the wood floors, I'm using basswood. I have 1/8 inch thick basswood, and I've doubled it up to make it a little bit thicker. I drew in the wood grain using a micron pen, and then I went over it and painted it with acrylic paints with different ranges of browns and black. I went into each of the cracks and added a little bit of black paint in there just to make the individual planks stand out more. And then I went over it with my pencil and added in some basic weathering and just kind of scratched it up with my thumbnail. For the back wall, I wanted to have a similar idea but with a slightly different texture, so I broke up some coffee stirrers and glued them down to make a shiplap effect. My intent was just to paint this white and distress it a little bit, but I've been wanting to try to crackle paint on something, so I decided to do it on this, and it turned out way different than I was expecting. I thought each individual board would have a little bit of a peel to it and it would look just slightly weathered, but instead it ended up looking almost like tree bark with a lot of cracks all over it and one very consistent layer of paint still. And I loved the effect, so I left it. And if you want to try it yourself, I'm just spreading white glue all over in a kind of a thick layer, and then I let it become tacky and went over it with another pretty thick layer of paint. And then I used a heat gun to help that dry, and you get this crazy crackle effect. For the other two sides of the building, I printed out some floral images that I found on a copy-free website, and then I am turning those into wallpaper. I didn't want the fairy to be missing the outdoors too much, so I kept this floral nature theme going throughout the rest of the build. So I had a fun trip to the hardware store to get this light cover, light switch, and power outlet, and I thought it would be pretty easy to just pop off the cover and take the bits that I needed, but in the end, obviously, because they're made durable to last in your home, I had to drill through the side and kind of hammer them apart and use a bunch of different techniques to actually get them open, and then I used super glue to glue them in place, and I added a little bit of baking soda to that to help them to set faster. I technically could have left them intact if I wasn't able to get the covers off of these parts, but I didn't want to do that because they're so thick that I thought they would take up too much room inside of the box. So that's why I persisted in trying to get them apart. If you are trying to recreate a fake light switch type of thing like this, then you don't actually have to get them apart if you're not able. Just allow space on the inside for that about an inch thick worth of like hardware. I'm making a hinge out of some styrene tubes. I just cut it into 3 parts and then glued it down using super glue and baking soda again to help it stick faster. And then I put another piece of tubing in between those 3 tubes and cut it down and glued it in place. So I set the box aside to assemble later and started working on the furniture. This is in 1/32 scale. It's a weird scale that's not very popular if used at all, but I came to the realization that this box was a weird size in general, so I needed to come up with a scale that would still work inside of the space, and this is what I chose after going through a few different scales and measurements and trying to see what would look the best. I drew out all of the furniture and pieces and then I scanned them in. I am hoping to have them up on my Patreon by the time this video goes live, but if I don't, then they'll be up shortly after. And speaking of Patreon, this is a perfect time to take a quick little commercial break. All right, quick commercial break. Guys, I am so excited. Today is gonna be the official launch of my Patreon. I did a soft launch on my last video where you had until the 15th to become a founder of my Patreon page, and I got 15 amazing, beautiful, wonderful, I don't have enough adjectives to describe these guys, but they are the most fantastic people in the world, and they signed up for the Patreon, so I'm shouting them out right now. They're so awesome, and thanks to them, I was able to actually get some supplies that I needed really badly to build this house. So thank you guys so much for being the first people to ever support me in like making art. This is crazy and I'm so happy and excited. And if you want to check out my Patreon, there's downloadables, there's some behind the scenes and some extra videos here and there. So if you want to become a patron and help support the channel, I'll have the link in the description box below and you will have my eternal gratitude. All right, let's get back to the build. So the wood that I picked up from the craft store is about a 1/16 of an inch thick, and it is once again basswood. And basswood seems to be pretty much the only wood that I can find at most of my craft stores, aside from balsa wood, which was going to be much too delicate for this project. One of the things that I realized while working with this was that even though for most of the project I was using wood glue to glue it together because that just made sense, like wood glue, wood product, yeah, that's gonna work. There's actually a better option, and for this small of a scale, it makes more sense to use super glue. So I unfortunately discovered that literally on like the last piece of furniture that I was building, but I thought I should mention it since I'm not sure whether or not I show this here in the video. And then after I had put together all of the furniture, I went and painted each piece with acrylic paint. This piece that I'm gluing together here is going to be a tiny writing desk since my fairy loves to write me poems and leave them around. And see these tiny paws? You might be wondering why they're not gray, because if you've watched my channel before, you know that my cat Allball is gray. Although he does have white paws. But these are not Allball's paws. Mysteriously, a tiny kitten showed up outside of our apartment a few weeks ago, and after like a week and a half of watching her and noticing that she was just eating paper that had been left behind the house, I started feeding her, and you know how cats are. She adopted us. So at the time of filming this, she still hasn't been to the vet, which is why I am not introducing her to you guys yet. But for some reason, all cats seem to love trying to steal my stuff while I'm crafting it. So she shows up in the video. So in case you guys are wondering where All Ball is, he's just in quarantine right now because we don't want them to share any germs since she's from the wild. And yeah, just thought I should explain that to you guys. I was so excited to start building this tiny armoire for the fairy house. I wanted the doors to be able to open and close even though it's really small. And I also wanted to do some carving but using texture paste. So here I'm making it using some wood glue, some white glue, some sawdust, and some cornstarch. And I can't tell you the exact measurements because I just mixed it until it looked like this doughy consistency and spread it out all over the wood. And then I used a toothpick to simulate carvings by creating little designs, as you can see here. And this turned out so much better than I thought it would turn out. I really like this version of the texture paste that I made because I did a test run and I made a fairy door, which the video for that is on my Patreon. So if you guys want to check that out, it's over there. It's available for any tier of pledge. And I tried this technique out over there making the fairy door, and it worked out really well, but not as well as this. I really like how this turned out. So I also used that technique on the bed frame, as you can see. And right about here is when I started using super glue as well. And like I said, the super glue works so much better for gluing these tiny little pieces together than the wood glue did. Especially for gluing the sides of the bed down, you can see how fast they are able to stick with the super glue versus with the wood glue, I'd have to like put pressure on them and hold them in place for so long. The next thing to make was a tiny mattress for the bed, and I'm using a piece of wood here and then 2 pieces of felt, and over the top of that I am just super gluing down some cotton. And there you go, tiny mattress. I wanted the bed to have a quilt, but the scale, once again, kind of hindered me from sewing a quilt. I didn't even attempt it. I figured it wouldn't work with this being that small for me to try and sew it. So instead, I printed out this pattern that I made in the computer, and then I used iron-on fabric transfer paper to put it onto some fabric, and I used invisible thread to help me to scrunch it up and make it look a little bit fluffier, and then I super glued it in place. And this is my newest obsession. So I made these little pots and cups and bowls out of Sculpey 2 Polymer Clay. And then I used some dried flowers for all of the flower arrangements and plants in this tiny house. It was so much fun making these dried flowers. I literally just threw them in the air fryer and dried them out. And they're so good for this scale because I could probably make flowers this small, but I don't think they would look nearly as realistic and cute, and they're just a touch of like real life nature. So if you want to try it out drying flowers for yourself and you have an air fryer for some reason, you just have to put it on the lowest setting and kind of let them go for like 15-20 minutes depending on the flowers that you got. And yeah, they just dry out and they're super pretty. You could probably use these in a million different other crafts, but they worked out so well as tiny plants in this little house. Next, I'm adding some moss and some vines to the back walls, and I'm using a string that I glued down and some acrylic paint. Like I said, I didn't want this fairy to feel like just because she's living in this apartment with me, she has to give up, you know, the outdoors and everything she loves and the flowers and the trees. So I really tried to bring that inside for her and fill this place with things that really spark joy. To add in all of these tiny pictures and knickknacks, I got some copyright-free images and shrunk them down extremely small and printed them out. I wasn't even sure how small to make them, so I made a couple different sizes and then went with the ones that I thought fit the best. And here I'm finally assembling the box. Okay, and now it's time to glue the box together and glue in all of the furniture. So this is the previous fairy house that I had built in a teapot, completely cracked and broken apart. And even though it still actually looks kind of cool like this, it's not really a great place for the fairy, obviously, since she moved out of there. So since she's been borrowing a lot of my things anyway, I thought I'd borrow some of the pieces from that and put them into this tiny house. And luckily for me, even though I didn't plan it that way, the scale was similar, so these pieces don't really stand out inside of this room. Okay, so look at these tiny flowers. Don't these dried flowers just look really, really good? Like, to me, it just adds something so much more special that they're real flowers than if I like tried to create them myself. And look how good the texture paint turned out. Can you believe that's not carved? Like, it really looks like I carved it. So this is such a game changer for me because now I can get way more intricate with the designs that I put on the little furniture, and I don't have to worry about being able to carve through like this tiny delicate wood. I'll still do some carving, but like this just gives me so much more versatility. So here's another first for me. I added lights to this build. This is my first time trying to add in LEDs, and I'm using a little push pin that I just took the tip out of for the light fixture because I didn't want to do anything too crazy with that. I got these nano LEDs online. They were super easy to use. They were like plug and play. So literally it came with a little piece of paper that showed me how to do it, and I just attached the wires like it said, and then it had a little 3-volt battery that came with it in the pack, which I flipped on, and voila. And so this is the finished product, and I love it. I know this fairy's gonna love living here. We got some books for her to read. We got a nice desk for her to write on. Plants, you know, to make her feel like she's back in her natural environment. So I hope I made an adequate room for my new fairy guest, and hopefully now my items will stop going missing, or at least when they go missing, I'll know where to look for them. What do you guys think of the build? Let me know down in the comments if you liked it, if you want to see more stuff like this, if you just want to say hi. I love hearing from you, and thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.